Acts and where this came from and some background to this. So if you can recall in the preferential, well, some of you that may recall, in the Preferential Procurement Regulations of 2001, there was reference and this was applicable in the regulation 2001. And I've got some slides on that, but we will just quickly go through that. It was then removed in 2011, and it was silent in 2017, and then there was a court case that I would like to go to, the Activist Imperial Court case, where that became another issue again, and the circular that was issued in 2021-22, circular number 1. So I'll just quickly touch on some of those things. So this is then in 2001. If you look, there was then the preference system for sale and letting of assets. There was the 80-20 and there was the 90-10. So not only for procuring goods, if you lease or sell an asset, dispose of an asset, you had to use the 80-20, 90-10 preference system. Okay, so that was the 2001. As I mentioned, the regulation, 2011 regulation, was then silent on that. But then if you look at the implementation guide of 2011, they specifically then in there mention that sale and letting of assets are no longer applicable. And so this is the reference to that. Because they wanted the highest, when they sell something, the state wanted the highest price. That was the reasoning at the time. Again, so they took it out. In 2017, it was then totally silent about the sale and letting of assets. And so the focus was on when you procure, use the 80-20 or the 90-10. And so that they were totally silent then on that. They didn't even mention in the implementation guide. Okay. But then what happened then was that they had a court case, Activist Imperial, Imperial Car Rental. And in that particular court case, you've got a reference there at the bottom towards this court case. But in that particular court case, the judge or the judges then, the Supreme Court of Appeal said, the Section 217, in its entirety also applies. And obviously, the triple PFA, the Act, as they talk about it later, I think they mentioned somewhere the PP Act. The PP Act, here you can see it. The triple PFA Act also applies not only to if you buy products and services or works, but also if you dispose of products and services. So that was then where this thing came in, raised its head after 2017. There was a court case related to that. Subsequent to that court case, 22, remember, we still didn't have the 2022 regulations, but at that time, Treasury issued a circular to say that, and they then, if you look at some text here that we extracted, basically they said that you now had to also use the 80-20 system for 80-20 or 90-10 for sale or disposal of or leasing of assets. And so they then refer also, if you look, I've got another slide here where they then refer to that particular court case. I don't see that slide, but anyway, so they then refer to that particular court case, that the AXA Imperial Court case, and then they brought in these formulas, which obviously were there in the 2011 regulations, the 80-20 and the 90-10. Okay, and now again in 2022, in the Preferential Procurement Regulation of 22, that is now there as Regulation 6 and Regulation 7. It's now included. So there was a question whether the regulations are applicable to educational institutions, and according to our interpretation, yes, it's applicable to educational institutions. I just saw that question there. Okay. So we now have this 80-20 and 90-10 system but now it's not called, it's called for income generating contracts. Okay. This term income generating contracts now was introduced. And so there are again the two formulas haven't changed. That's still the same. Right. So the focus then, as I said, and I just again took an extract here of the definitions, but I wanted to focus on the definition for tender for income generating contracts. Okay. Tender for income generating contracts means a written offer in the form. You can read that. I'm not going to go through that. But then it says here specific towards the end, it excludes direct sales. And disposal of assets through public auctions. So excluding direct sale and disposal of assets through public auctions. So that obviously begs the questions, what constitute direct sales? What is a public auction? And in some, you might have some answers on this, but those were then essentially two of the questions we then asked. Okay. Another thing that I just wanted to raise on, and one of the colleagues this morning via email asked this particular question. This tenders for income generating contracts that we talk about here, okay, does that only include tenders, because the word tenders they use, does it only include sales, disposal, lease transactions, income generating transactions over 1 million, or does it include stuff under 1 million? Because of the tender definition, or not the tender, but that typically tenders are typically things over 1 million. Okay, so does this include stuff under 1 million? So if you're going to sell a desk, this is not going to be more than 1 million. Does that apply to selling a desk? Okay, and we can. So I've got my own interpretation of this, but we can certainly look at that. And then, I don't know where this thing came in. So this was not sure where that slide, that was supposed to be late on, so apologies about that. Okay, so remember, this was then one of the issues. Does it apply to stuff under 1 million? And we can come back to that question. Or is it over 1 million? Or does it include everything? So what is a direct sale? I don't know what happened here to my slides. I think I might have deleted the slide. Sorry, so I had a slide when I talked about direct sales. I had a slide, and I think I might have deleted that slide or hidden it. So just give me a minute. I think I hidden the wrong slide. Apologies about that. Okay. It's not sharing again. Right, can you see the slides again? Okay, so we dealt with this particular thing. We haven't answered that, but we have this question. So then we started asking, what is direct sales? What is a direct sale? Okay, now in order to answer, we then looked at on the procurement side around those direct other methods, procurement methods where you deal directly with one supplier. And so we looked at some of those definitions in terms of direct negotiations, World Bank, direct contracting, also World Bank, direct award, direct procurement. So all of those type of definitions, that's the direct reference in the African Development Bank references. And when they say, can also define income generating activity as a result of direct sales. Okay, So we then said, okay, can we use that type of, so we deal with one supplier, we would deal with one, in this case, not supplier, but with one buyer. We just deal with one buyer. Is that kind of the direct, one buyer approach us for selling something, okay? And so we kind of said, is that maybe then a similarity to this direct sales thing? Okay, so for example, the equivalent, as we said, on currently on the procurement side, we would deal with, for example, single sourcing. So you might, instead of this terminology here, the terminology of single sourcing or sole sourcing might be something that's more familiar to you. Okay, so that's then what we started saying. What is direct sales? Yeah, that was just one of the definitions. Let's skip that for now. And so then we start saying ticket sales, okay, tickets for transport, for trains, buses, etc. When you lease a unit or bungalow, those are direct sales. Sale of bulk water and electricity for Eskom, selling to municipalities, the water board selling to municipalities water, are those then direct sales? Also, then you as a ratepayer, when the municipality interact with you, the electricity and water, are those all then direct sales? Sale of freight services like Transnet Freight Rail, we're paying licenses to the SABC. Are all of these things then direct sales? So kind of the interpretation, are these things then excluded in terms of that formula that we were talking about? Okay, is this what's included by the meaning of direct sales? Okay. The other thing then that it started talking about is this, it also says excluding public auctions. And so, you know, what is a public auction? Now, you know, sometimes some institutions I'm aware of that they will sell only to staff members certain items, and the staff members would gather or is it not, you know? An electronic auction, is that defined as a public auction that you get? You have the English auction as an example. That's the most common one. If you know, if the government garage wants to sell their vehicles, okay, you have an auction, they advertise in newspapers, everybody goes there, they sell the vehicle. That's typically cool. That's the English auction. But then you have auction. There's the big prey auction. These are all kind of different types of auctions. Public auctions in terms of the definition of public auctions. Okay. So those were then some of the questions. We didn't really have answers to all of these, but we started to say, okay, what are those things? Okay. Those are some of the questions that we then had. And then obviously we get to the thing about the how do we then decide the preference points? How do we allocate the 80-20 preference points? Okay. Can it be different? And can it be different than the scores that you use for procurement? Okay. So you're going to have in your policy, you're going to say, your policy might say, these are how we're going to allocate points out of 20. And these are how we're going to allocate points out of 10 in terms of the 80-20 and the 90-10. Okay. But can those points that you then allocate be different when we go and say, okay, for income generating contracts, these are then the point system we're going to be using. So can it be different? And the other question is, should it be tied to the BE scorecard? Those points that we're going to decide on, must they be tied to the scorecard? And I think we got a little bit, maybe some indication of that, but still not totally sure. But there, if you look at the BE, excuse me, if you look at the BE Act, Section 10 of the BE Act, it says that you must apply the relevant codes to the preferential procurement policy. So by implication, our interpretation, current interpretation of this is, yes, there must be an element of the codes in terms of, don't have to be all of that, but there must be an element of the codes included in how you then, excuse me, included in how you determine your 80 points, sorry, your 20 points or your 10 points. Okay, and so these were some of the, these were then some of the, you know, these were some of the previous, both the 2017 and the 2011 preference point system, how they allocated points out of 20 and out of 10. Now, but by that, we already know that we can change this because Treasury changed it. So we can have different point systems. Okay, so we know that already. But are we going to use something like this? That's one option. We can even use something more aggressive. Okay, I don't know what's happening here. Not sure why that happened. Okay. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. Let me share it again. We had okay. So that's how we, as I said, those were kind of, those are just some of the options we can use. We can use something like this, we think, where you go very aggressive, okay? And you say that if you're level 1, you're going to get 20 points. If you're level 2, you're going to get 18 points. And if you're lower than level 3, level 2, you get 0 points. And likewise on the 10-point system. The other thing is you can even use, you can in your policy say that the preference system will be determined per tender. And you don't have this in the policy, you just say it will be determined per tender, but all of those things have implications. Okay. And then lastly, coming back to this thing of that it must be tied back to the actual codes, this could be another option that you could have. Okay, so we can say out of the 20 points, 10 points are going to be, we're using the scorecard. The other 10 points we're going to split, and the other 10 points we're going to split, and we might then use it by locality. So for municipalities or provinces, might then say you can use X points for locality. There's some points for tender enterprise. You might even say that some of those points would be determined per tender. So that could be another option how you could potentially split this. Okay, and these could be, as I said, could be for different, it could be different for procurement versus what we call now income generating contracts, disposals, sale of assets, etc. So these are just some of the things that we were thinking about in terms of that particular, the income generating contracts section of the regulations. I'm gonna open up the discussion now, and maybe we can just want to see. I know there were some comments. I'm gonna also then look at some of the comments that chats that were there. Carelse. Okay, so Gerard was just mentioning there, and so we spoke earlier about does the does the 1 million apply also for income generating? Does it apply only to contracts over 1 million, or is that what's called? No, that's not what Gerard's saying. Just see. Okay, so Gerard's view is that, okay, so I see the Gerard's view saying by only saying that it applies to, that the 80/20 applies to everything up to 50 million. I think that's what Gerard is saying there. That kind of gets answered by that particular thing in terms of the 1 million threshold. Okay. Gerard, I've got so I think we come to the same answer, but I've got a slightly different view. Okay, Ron, you first. I see there's some hands up already, people.
Thanks, Henry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Henry, this was an absolutely masterful presentation. We strongly encouraged our members to attend, and I can say without any contradiction that we were not disappointed. You've really taken it through at an incredible level. Thank you for that. And also looking at the attendance, it's really nice to see numbers of 120. In fact, I see even one of our MDs has attended. So this is really, really good. And Henry, if we can maybe get a copy of your presentation and maybe even invite you to give this presentation in a very slightly modified form at our forum, and I'll say why slightly modified. So Henry, I'm in agreement with virtually everything you've said. I've just got two questions. The one is that when you looked at the public auction, you focused very much on the auction aspect, not on the public aspect. So you've given different types of auctions, but those are the options you've given are probably those that are public auctions. But in your example of selling to staff, staff is definitely not public. So I would expand on the public aspect, and what constitutes public, and I think that's reasonably clear. The second area which I would suggest you augment is just is the change regarding market value. I think it is a significant change, worthy of amplification. The 2017 PPR did speak about market value, failing which you would possibly cancel if your negotiations failed. But that doesn't come through in the new one, with the implication that you can actually spend a lot more than market value if you wanted a transformation premium. So thanks for that, Henry. Well done.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, good, very valid points on also on the market-related value issue. A big, significant change. Also?
Yes, thanks, Ron. Henry, I think I need to mention that this is very insightful presentation, but I just wanted to raise this because I heard you specifically mentioning the education institution as one of those organs of state that are included on these regulations. I'm not sure if you've already seen Motsega's comment, because I agree with his assertion, because the institution of higher learning or public universities are not necessarily mentioned in the section of the section 239 of the Constitution, and we are also not mentioned in the schedule of the PFMA. Hence, PFMA is not applicable at universities. But when you look at the Act itself, when it defines an organ of state, it defines an organ of state as a national or provincial department, as per the PFMA, or municipalities, or constitutional institution as designed in the PFMA or Parliament, as well as provincial legislature. And it says, and any other institution or a category of institution declared by the Minister of Finance. And there is no notice that specifically declare universities or public institution, higher education institution as organs of state. And therefore, what we do, we only use the PFMA as part of the best practice. And when the regulations was invalidated by the courts, what we did as a university, we appointed a law firm to determine if there is an implication in terms of the outcome of the verdict of the court. And the firm declared that this has got no implication, as we are not an organ of state for procurement purposes. And there was a case law that was referred to. I see that you are already flagging a case law. There's a case law that was referred to, which is contrary to what it's currently flagged. So I think we need to really ventilate it more, so that then we're able to unpack and then maybe agree in principle whether the Institute of Higher Learning are included or not included. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you also. Thanks for that. Yeah, as I said, when I said to you at the time, so according to our opinion at this stage, and I know there is still, so I take it, I'm firm with you on the PFMA side. I do agree with you there. The PFMA definitely, don't have it now here, but that with the Act, the Triple PFA Act, or the PFMA for that matter, it dealt with a PAJA, and it then said a PAJA must apply then obviously as well. The provisions of PAJA must apply even to universities. And I think I just don't, I'll try and find, but that's obviously, I acknowledge that's not the Triple PFA. That's where it deals with PAJA itself. But that I acknowledge. So as I said, I'm also, we're not totally clear yet, but thanks for that input also. Lindiwe?
Yes, thank you, Harry, and good morning to everyone. I would like to touch on the new regulations, Harry. I don't know to what extent have some of the colleagues on the call seen the media statement which was issued yesterday by National Treasury. If you can allow me a few minutes to just read one of the clauses on the media statement. It says that, it was issued yesterday. It says that while we are finalizing the public procurement bill, which will empower the Minister of Finance to set preferential procurement, the 2022 regulation repeal the 2017 regulations and take effect on 16 January 2023. Then listen to this following statement. In essence, the 2022 regulations are a placeholder while we finalize the bill. So the question that I have is that why, as institutions, we now have to go through the process of having our own preferential procurement policy, whereas this is going, according to this statement, the new bill, there's a possibility that it might come in effect anytime after March next year. And my question is that, do we still have to go through the process of having that, whereas everything that is currently happening, according to the content of this media statement, is just a interim because of, like you rightly said in your presentation, they're trying to address the court judgment, and that is why the regulations, they take into effect on 16 January 2023. But 3 months down the line, there's a likelihood that you are going to have a public procurement bill in place, and which is going to nullify everything that perhaps the organ of state would have done. Thank you, Henry.
Okay. Good points, Lindiwe. Happy to hear what other colleagues are saying about that. So I think, yeah, they did mention that they want to bring it out pretty soon. Whether that is practical, whether that is going to be the case, given the significance of that particular bill, is another question. So I can't answer that, but here's my opinion is most probably they quite aggressive. I might even say unrealistic if they think it's going to be ready by March. But that's just my opinion. But I hear you. I hear you in terms of the media publication that came out yesterday. Any other people on something on that particular point? Okay.
Hi, Andrew.
Yes.
Can I just come in, morning colleagues, on the issue raised by Lindiwe regarding this regulations being a placeholder. I think in line with what Prof. Theo mentioned the other day in terms of the timelines of having the procurement bill coming into effect, it's that basically Treasury is also acknowledging that it's going to be a long process. Yes, it is a placeholder, but that it's going to be a placeholder for quite a long time, because remember in March, the bill will not come into, the act will not come into effect. It's still going through the public consultations, and as Prof. Pio mentioned that then you'd have recess as a result of upcoming elections in 2024. So you'll only see actually the Procurement Act coming into effect after 2024. So likelihood is that whatever interim arrangements that we're going to, institutions are required to have now will run, at least we are certain that for the whole of next year, we'll be running on those interim arrangements.
Thanks, Motso. Thanks. I see your hand is still raised. You obviously wanted to make a different point. Shaba and Saneli, I see your hands there. So maybe, Shaba, maybe you first.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me also join the chorus and commend a very insightful presentation on a very rare topic, yet so important, especially looking at, you know, how much government properties is being disposed of lately, including land and buildings. And there wasn't such guidance in terms of dealing with this topic. My only question on this one is, when you look at the Treasury Regulation 10.2 on disposal and letting of assets, 10.2.1 says it must be at market related. Obviously, it's those maybe direct transactions as you have outlined, and then also by tender or auction. And then tender is the one of the 90-20. But it further goes on to say, whichever is most advantageous to the state. So I think,
Mr. Chaba, when you talk about the regulation, what regulation are you referring to? You mentioned 10 point.
It's Treasury Regulations 10.2.
Okay, so is the PFMA regulation or the?
It's the regulations to PFMA, the Treasury Regulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
PFMA regulations.
Yeah, because then the difficult part is, it says whichever is most advantageous to the state unless determined otherwise by the relevant treasury. Maybe one would take these regulations as that determination by treasury, because the difficult part has always been, how are you going to outright say which one is advantageous to the state? And what is it that you look at when you look at an advantage to the state? Do you look at the value for money, which is the rent value, or do you look at any other goal which the state is running? And how do you then make that determination to say which one is advantageous, most advantageous to the state, so that you are able to comply with that? So I'm not so certain that if by the fact that they have included this now in the PPR2022, and the fact that they have now outlined different methods, does it mean that Treasury is now giving the organs of state that chance to say which one they want, and they would have ticked the box in terms of the most advantageous? And I think that's the only, I think, thing that I'm struggling with in terms of linking the regulations and dealing with this, because it did not deal with it. And there isn't any other guidance that deals with it, so that we close that gap in terms of which method is most advantageous to the state and what are the elements which we are looking at. Are you looking at the rent value for money? Are you looking at triple BEE? What is it that you are looking at? Thank you. And then lastly, can I please ask that Henry, you please project the slide on the examples for direct sales again, those examples on direct sales.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'll do that again. I was just gonna try and for the colleagues, but I'll quickly do that. I was gonna try for the colleagues just to bring up the PFM regulations to show the section that you were referring to, but let me project the slide. Let's find it now. Okay. Examples, right? That's the one you're looking for.
Thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chamba. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will actually look at that as well, that regulation 10 that you were talking about. Regulation 10.2, I think you mentioned. Ms. Chamba? Sorry, Sanelli?
Thanks, Henry. Sorry, man, joined quite a bit late. I wanted to touch on my colleague's question, Lindy, with regards to the necessity of having these new regulations, why they probably would be out in no time. Just want to share some light with regards to this. Look, if you look at the situation we faced before, when we had to leave on exemption, when the Constitutional Court sets aside the regulations, it tells you that there shouldn't be a space where we live outside of regulations. So if the 2017 regulations were to be set aside, then they have to be the new ones. So in the absence of any regulation,
you might be some music on. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm in another place here. It's quite
okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me though?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yes, I'm saying, so in the absence of that, then it means we have to live with exemptions. So it cannot be possible, even if it's a week or two. It has to be, there have to be a framework that guides organs of state on how to procure. That will include the formula and the threshold. So in that case, I think my colleague also covered nicely when she said that we are not so sure if they would make it on the date with the procurement bill. So my advice is, as things are, it's highly unlikely that they will meet the date. But that's the situation that we face.
Thank you, Sanele. Seke, you had a comment that I haven't.
Thank you, Henry. I think my comment also will dovetail with Sanele's comment. I wanted to just highlight that in the Constitutional Court matter, the Constitutional Court in the AfriForum matter rather, did highlight that the Preferential Procurement Framework Act obligates organs of state to have their own preferential procurement policy, and that the ministry acted ultra vires by taking this duty upon itself when it felt that the organs of state were failing to do this. So my take, therefore, is that until the Preferential Procurement Policy, or rather the Preferential Procurement Framework Act, is repealed, I guess that's what the Public Procurement Act will eventually do. But before then, we are all duty bound and legally compelled to have our own preferential procurement policies. And failure to do that would, in my view, it becomes a non-compliance issue. And I think that I'm just trying to emphasize that waiting for the public procurement bill to become an act is not an option, because we would be non-compliant with the Preferential Procurement Framework Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Tseke. Carelse, your hand was up as well.
Hi, good morning, Henry. Thank you very much for a very good presentation. Echoing.
You're quite silent. It might just be my problem, my internet. Yeah,
I think it's probably my connection here. Can you hear me, Henry?
I can hear you now better.
Yeah, I'm trying to bend over backwards. I'm also in a public space. Henry, if you can hear me, I just got one question. That's a preference table. The question in the chat is, isn't that exactly what we are not allowed to do anymore? Because section 2(1)(d) clearly states that you may, not must, you may allocate points for specific goals. And that specific goals, in my understanding, is only, as you would know, race, gender, and disability, and if at all, programs of the RDP. So would any reference for points allocation to BE status level not be contrary to what the regulations are saying, as well as the court is saying, with the understanding that you still have to apply your BE criteria as per the BE Act, but I'm focusing on the points allocation. Yeah. So if you can just maybe bring up your slide again.
Okay. Just see what was that. So, yeah. Shot if you. Was actually some of the earlier slides.
The table that you
oh, the tables. Oh, you're talking about the tables. Okay. Okay.
Yes, my query involves.
Can you use that?
Contrary?
Yeah.
Can we use
that?
These tables. The organization use the table, you know, those values that you propose there.
Yes.
The
radical
values.
Yes.
Here we go. My question is, in terms of section 2(1)(d), does it not exclude? Can you use what is in front of us?
Our interpretation at this stage is yes. It says you may use the others, you may use those other things that they reference there, but it didn't kind of limit you there in terms of what to use. It says you may. It doesn't say you must. It says you may. So that's our interpretation. So and furthermore, why we actually think that you have to have an element of the codes of the status levels is because, and I'm just trying to find my slide here, is because of the BE Act, where it talks about you must actually use those codes of good practice when developing the preferential procurement policy. That's our interpretation at this stage around that current. And yeah, so we think that you may use it. Not saying you must use, but you may use those type of things.
But I think my different view to that is that because the Act is silent in section 2(1)(d), the Act is clearly specifying the ambit in which you must operate. Hence, it's called a Policy Framework Act. So the framework, your ring fence around section 2(1)(d) can only be one of 4 elements for allocation of points, i.e., race, gender, disability, and the elements of the RDP, exactly as we had it in 2001 regulations. So I slightly on a different part to say that I don't think you can use the B status level of a bidder to allocate points. And I think that was one of the issues the court had, the Constitutional Court. Now, I want to reaffirm my view also in the court ruled on the expediency or the necessity of the minister making the regulations. But the court, in my mind, did not actually say that all those things like pre-qualification and those things were legal or unconstitutional.
You talk about the Constitutional Court
statement that the court, yes, that it said that the minister doesn't have, he acted ultra vires, so to say. So that's just my view on quid around whether the table would be allowed or not. I think in my kind of situation where I sit, I think it will be dismissed. because we look at 21D. So when we read prescript in law, we say to ourselves, what is the ambit? What is the framework? And can I operate outside of the framework? And the framework, even with the may, says that you can only use one of 4 elements for the allocation of points. RDP programs, which is there's to 8 elements of programs: gender, race, and disability. I don't think you can move outside of that and allocate a point for a bidder's BE status. I'll stop there. Thanks, Henry. Thanks for a good presentation.
Okay. Sandy? Sandy, you had your hand up?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Good morning, colleagues. I wanted to first, before I ask my question, I want to follow up, ask a follow-up question to Gerrit on what he's raising. That what about the section 10 of the BE Act then? Is he saying then we don't have to apply it? Because now at some point there also has to be some provision that we make within our preferential procurement that talks to section 10. So I would want to hear his view. My main comment, Henry, was on what Masichaba was raising on the section 10.2.1 of the Treasury Regulation. It says that disposal of asset must be at marketed related value or tender or auction, whichever is most advantageous. So ideally, it has to be the minimum supposed to be market related value. However, if a tender or an auction gives you a higher value, you will then go for that. That's what I understand to say, whichever is more advantageous. But either way, whatever you do, you cannot go below the market related value when you dispose. So that's what I wanted to comment about. But I would really like to hear what Mr. Davis say about Section 10 of the BE Act. Thank you.
Gerrit? Gerrit, are you there still? In terms of Tadi's point? It seems Gerrit has an issue now. He did say he's in a public area, so we'll probably have an issue there. Okay. I haven't actually gone through all the chat stuff. Let me just see. Okay. Tabi saying so we're not saying you cannot award to some of those other goals, but you know, and this is just at the moment this is our opinion, is that there must be an element of the scorecard in it as well, based on my slide as I think it's still presented here. That's the same question. All right, colleagues. Tahira? Tahira, I saw your hand.
Hi, yeah, sorry, it's actually Miresh, just on behalf of Carelse. Apologies for that. Yeah, just firstly, a great presentation. Just a comment or just something I wanted to just highlight to the group with regards to what Gerrit said. If you read the media statement that was also released from Treasury, they do provide guidelines, or they've stated what the specific goals are. And in there, they've also reiterated that as per section 2.1.d, that it's, it's either for categories of persons historically disadvantaged on the basis of race, gender, disability, including the RDP goals. So just, it's another point, I suppose, that we need to get further clarification on. But, that does support what Gerrit has actually said. Thank you.
Okay. Zunaid?
Hi, thank you. Just on the point of race, if you ask yourself what is race, so if somebody submits for example, a QEC affidavit or an EME affidavit to say that 0% black owned or 100% black owned. Then you can allocate that point. So if you're applying the 80-20, you can assume, of course, that if you're 100% black owned, that you have been disadvantaged during the apartheid era. And because you were disadvantaged, you're entitled to preferential procurement and therefore entitled to the points, which is linked to that scorecard that you've now, the table that you've presented here. So if you are level 1, then you're entitled to the 20 points or the 10 points as the case may be. And that's directly tied in, I would say, to race, because if you're 100% black owned, and remember 21D says you can advantage these disadvantaged individuals on the basis of race, gender, and disability. So I think you can apply it on that basis.
Okay. So Zunaid, yeah, so I think the question for us is whether you must apply that one, or you can use elements of the codes, the BE, the level 1 to level 8 of the codes as well in terms of your calculation of points. And so I think that was one of the things that's still kind of in a question. Just in terms of, just coming back, sorry, that was just coming back to Zunaid as well, in terms of, and then Gerard in terms of that. And I don't want to, you know, as I said, I'm open to be corrected, but the Minister of Finance, I think it was yesterday, we tried to correct the issue, the publications that came out over the weekend. I saw something yesterday. He again then referred to the BE Act. And so he again referred to Section 10 of the BE Act when he actually spoke about the preferential procurement yesterday. So yeah, I would then be interesting why they mentioned that again. You know, but I'm not taking away what you're saying. Yeah, you mentioned that again yesterday. Section 10 of the BE Act. Carelse, you back there?
Yeah,
Carelse?
Henry.
No?
Yeah, can you hear me, Henry?
I can hear you.
Yes, thanks for allowing me to speak again. Zunaid is actually correct. The minister made reference yesterday to the need to comply with the BE Act Section 10. However, Section 10 already talks about qualification criteria, and race, gender, and disability, and the RPP programs like the local business, locality, is already a qualification criteria. Okay? The court once again said the minister did not have the need to then include into that ambit. Now the question is, can you then say, can I include a BE scorecard to prove my race, my gender, my disability? In the year 2001, when the proof, remember the regulations of private also now ask for proof. Back then, the owners had to provide certified copies of the IDs. The ID would have stated the gender, and if disabled points were claimed, a letter from the superintendent of the provincial health department was required to claim, for example, 2 points, the disabled element was included. So, as I say, I'll stand very strongly on my view that BE can't be brought in the equation, because AfriForum on Sunday said, do not disguise the use of that triple BE pre-qualification again into your points allocation. We would be at the door of the court tomorrow, and I'm in agreement with him on that one. Thanks, Henry.
Okay. So Nele.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Am I having no noise now? The background noise, is it fine?
No, it's fine. You're fine now.
That's great. Just wanted to tap in again on this point around BE. So the issue is with the BE is that the BE in its current form seeks to set goals or specific goals, or it seeks to take away the power that has been allocated to the accounting officers or the organs of state to come up with their own specific goals or their own preferential policies. So in a case where an organ of state wishes to use BE provisions in their current form, then the organ of states will then have to adopt BE to be their own policy. So that means they would say, we as X, Y, and Z are adopting BE to be our policy, and we will use it as an empowerment method to achieve Section 21D of the PPPFA. So then there would be no challenge. Then they will engage TTI, BE Commission to receive necessary trainings on how to work around that. But it's then, in its current form, it's no longer a must. Although there are provisions in the Act, there is now a competition on which acts or which legislation or which prescript takes precedent. And in the procurement space, then it will be the PPPFA that takes precedent. But if you go and adopt BE, that becomes your policy of the organization. So it can be used, but in that fashion. But the thing is, there should be some sort of alignment. There should be some sort of alignment, because we can't tell us to use BE, and if we try to find the provisions that lead us to use BE, we don't find them. We can't find them, because BE is not a procurement act. We only have one procurement act, you know. So those are the things that I think National Treasury should try to fight and to solve, that actually that gray area. Maybe the bill will come and straighten out that. That's going forward, this is the Procurement Act, and anything that's actually is provided for should be within these provisions. Thanks.
Yeah, it would be nice if they will bring out something. I suspect not, Sanele, but yeah, it would be nice if they. Zuna, your hand is up again.
Hi, thank you. I just want to take it back all the way to the Constitution, and you mentioned Section 217 of the Constitution, where it states specifically that when you procure goods, you must do so in accordance with a system that is fair, equitable, transparent, competitive, and cost-effective. So you may argue, well, why we're referring to race? Does that not violate the principles of fairness and equality? But then we can't read Section 217 in isolation. Section 2172 qualifies that, as you rightly mentioned, where it says, does not prevent organs of state or institutions referred to in that subsection from implementing a procurement policy for providing for categories of preference in allocation of contracts and the protection, this is very important, or advancements of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. So we don't see race coming to this, but we do see race coming to Section 9 of the Constitution, where it says that you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, sexual orientation, gender, etc. So what we are saying is that, given the fact that we all know historically that there's been this systematic disenfranchisement of non-whites to participate freely in the economy of the country, and because of that systematic disenfranchisement, that dictates the parameters within which your right to equality should be understood, right? And therefore your race classification, that lays the foundation, essentially, or the race classification used as a restitutionary measure by the South African government, that falls within the gambit of the Constitution and complies with legislative requirements. So that then filters into now, or lays the foundation for your preferential procurement policy. And that takes us back to Section 217.21D, which specifically then refers to race again. So when we're reading that 21D, we have to read it holistically in harmonization with the Constitution to say, what are we trying to achieve by saying to advance disadvantaged individuals on the basis of race? And therefore, if you allocate points for preference, which if you look at the 2017 regulations, it's price and preference, and you have to develop your own preferential procurement policy within the following framework. This is in Section 2.1 of the preferential procurement, and that framework dictates preference. And preference refers to 2.1D, to award points for specific goals, and those specific goals is once again race. And therefore, I'm saying that if you look at race in the terms of the BEE Act,
it doesn't define race, but it refers to black as Africans, colored, Indians, but those terms are not defined. So we're sitting in a very difficult position where race or black, Indian, color, those terms are not defined. So when somebody submits or is tendering for a particular bid and indicates, for example, that they're 100% black owned, we can only then apply the preference in respect of having that total objective of what we're trying to achieve by saying that if you're 100% black owned, you're then entitled to, for example, 20 preference points. But that is up to the organ of state to determine the amount of points that will be allocated for preference at the end of the day. So what I'm saying is, it says may, yes, but we cannot exclude it. We still have to disadvantage individuals who have been disadvantaged on the basis of race. And that is why that will remain relevant going forward with regards to allocation of points.
Okay, thanks, Zaid. Gerrit, your hand is up, but I think it might still be from a previous spoker. I don't think it's a new point.
Sorry, I'll take it down. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So some interesting issues that came out here. Any other things?
Yes, Henry.
Yes, Ron.
Henry, so I just want to pick up your point also about the guideline, and it's not getting a guideline from National Treasury. You can't expect one, but in fact, it seems as if we did get a press release, which seems to have an element of guidance, and the fact that they don't ask for empowerment for legislative authority for a guideline, doesn't mean they can't issue a guideline. They will still continue to do so. It may not just have the same force of law, which they may have intended with the prior 2017, where they gave the circular an enhanced status. From what I'm hearing, there are, and listening to the discussion, at least 5 reasons why National Treasury should provide clarification. They've already given a press release. They can do more. And let's try and summarize. There are probably more points, but these are the ones that spring to mind for me. The one is that there are 3 different exemptions from income generation. And we're not clear on at least how to apply at least one of those, maybe 2. So let's just summarize. On the objective criteria, there's now no reason to disclose it. But now, how do you determine from the content whether it's objective criteria or not? We need some guidance, because there's nothing saying about an internal process, an internal decision documented, absolutely nothing. So people must just assume by the content that it is objective criteria. If you look at the court cases, how they interpret objective is not what philosophers or others would refer to as objective. There seems to be an element of subjectivity, or of judgment. So I do think they need to give us clear examples of how we apply objective criteria on the income side. The second one is the debate about the relevance of the codes, and well done for bringing this in. And it links to another question on the chat group, are the SPD 61.1, for example, still applicable or not? So if we take your approach that the codes are relevant, that you must at minimum give some scores based on those BBB status levels, then the SPD 6 then becomes relevant. But we do need clarification from National Treasury in terms of the extent that the BBB status levels are or are not applicable, or else others might have their own views. Thirdly, it's the issue on the market value. There's been a really good discussion on the apparent contradiction. We've now got 2 different sets of Treasury regulations on disposals. The former speaks about market value, and there's also an interpretation issue there in terms of what is advantageous. We need clarification on that because it has an impact. Secondly, the latest Treasury regulation, is it read in light of the former Treasury regulation, or is it, or does it displace it? We don't know. This thing's really, really subjective. Then on the issue of direct sales. So you gave excellent examples of what may or may not constitute direct sales. And I don't blame you for not giving direct guidance, Henry. But National Treasury cannot, it's egregious to use the term direct sales, which is very difficult to pin down. It's very elusive. If you look at the internet, it's very elusive getting an authoritative definition of direct sales. And so let me just summarize why direct sales may be quite nuanced. And I've done an internet research, and I don't have a very clear view, but if I just try and pull together, Henry, what you said. So firstly it seems to me that the private sector uses direct sales as a sale directly to a consumer, i.e. it's without an intermediary. And that's why examples of, if Eskom, for example, sells directly to a consumer without going through a bulk service provider like a municipality, they would declare it in their financial statements as a direct sales, and they do, as do Transnet. So there is one definition, you're just selling directly. Then you quoted an example of single source. And I think it's an excellent example and should maybe be expanded to include sole source and multi-source, just to be consistent. I think those may constitute direct sales because you need to have the other means on the income side as well, and maybe direct sales using these categories are it. Then there are also sales internally. So the example of staff accommodation where you charge rentals or selling of surplus furniture or laptops to staff in terms of your policy. Some institutions internationally regard those in the category of direct sales. So are they or are they not? The fourth category that I've come across, I think it's even used in the Western Cape, is in the context of land sales, where you've got a piece of land that seems to be impossible to sell. For example, it's landlocked, it's got no access. And they speak about using direct sales in those circumstances. So for these real demons that you're really battling to sell, you can use a direct sale. And maybe that means, as you've said, Henry, it's a sale to one person or to, you know, a limited market. So National Treasury clearly need to define what's direct sales and what's not. Then number four is, sorry, I have said number four. Number five is the scope. We've had a huge debate about what you can put in the transformation policy and what you can't. I listened very carefully to the one example about Section 9 of the Constitution, and it made me even more confused, because if a group that has been discriminated with those with sexual preference, well, that implies that that's actually somebody who then gets preference in a sense. So are we, a National Treasury seems to be implying you're limited to 4 categories. But those 4 categories, even if we assume they're correct, we need some guidance on what they mean. For example, disability. Disability is a very complex thing. It's not just physical disability. There's a Mental Health Act. People with Asperger's, for example, people like Elon Musk, are technically disabled. Now, do we give preference to people like Elon Musk? You know, it's unclear because legally, an Asperger's person is technically disabled, and there are a number of other mental conditions as well. Then my last point, and I just want to pick up on Lindiwe's excellent point. So her point is that whatever policies we want to put in place, they're going to probably be blown out of the water when the procurement bill becomes law. And even if we assume you know, it'll only be a year or so's time, the fact is that whatever we do will probably be temporary. And so our own philosophy that I'm thinking of, and we'll still have to network this and deal with this internally, is that ideally you want to put the minimum changes in place now, because to roll out a massive change with all the systems and policies and guidelines and teaching that goes with it only to have it blown out the water when the procurement bill comes across. So ideally, one should mirror as closely as possible what's in place, taking cognizance of the fact that the scope may exclude things like local procurement or localization, or SMMEs. Those may not be covered in the original scope. Those are things National Treasury needs to clarify. Thanks, Henry.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very valid points you make, Ron. Zanele?
Thanks, Henry. Mine is, I'm not sure if you've covered it because I've joined late. Apologies again. I want to check the view of the colleagues when they're developing their preferential policies. How are they planning to navigate around the space of defining terms? Obviously, one had hoped that the regulation would come with some glossary of terms defined, and probably tap into that to define some of your aspects in policy. But you've seen very, very minimal list of definitions, which will not even take you anywhere. And actually, the aspects that are there to be defined are not defined, like your historically disadvantaged, your categories of persons, and now you have to define that yourself. Just wanted to know if the colleagues, or if you, Henry, can guide me on this one.
Let's open it up first. Anybody go through that? Distance that we talked about. Well, that's an LS mentioning. Are we going to define it? Are we going to look at also relates to some of Ron's points around some of these definitions. Katlejo? Sorry. Tanya, you wanted to say something? Tanya, I think you're still unmuted.
Henry, I'm sorted now. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Katlejo? I can see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. As you have taken us through the new regulations and the inputs that are made by colleagues, what is quite clear is that the regulations that have been proposed are purely clerical. It's a clerical document achieving no objective. What is actually also blatantly clear is that there is a eminent contradiction in what is preferential, because what we have in the regulations, there's nothing preferential. It's just a pure calculation and a definite progressive regression of what was happening in the past dispensation. Unfortunately, the same constitution that we rely on speaks about we can't discriminate on the basis of race and so forth, but the prior dispensation was based on race. So when we speak about healing things of the past, what are we talking about? 217 part 1 speaks about a system fair, equitable, transparent. The second part of it makes preferential procurement optional. By the way, you are not excluded from providing for. It's an optional. And you can even hear the same wording is used in the act itself. It doesn't say must, it says you may provide for. So what is clearing from this is that issues of preferential procurement within public service, it's purely, by the way, it's optional. It's starting from the Constitution with its contradiction in the preamble, healing the divisions of the past and so forth. But yet at the same time, when you look at it's just perpetuating exactly what was dominant. That is the sad thing that I'm noticing, and that's just a comment from me, colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Katlego. Interesting to see what the draft bill is going to say in terms of that section 4, the current chapter 4. Yeah, obviously the draft bill, the draft one was very light on that. So Nate?
Hi, thanks. I just want to refer my colleague to the famous case of Harkson versus Lane, where the court established, the Constitutional Court established the principle that your challenge law or conduct may differentiate between people or categories of people if there's a rational connection to a legitimate government purpose. And even if that rational connection exists, there may still be discrimination, but very importantly, not all discrimination is unfair discrimination. That's point number one. Point number two is that you can't say, we know that race classification or race formed the foundation of the apartheid laws. But if it wasn't for race classification, we wouldn't have the apartheid system, right? But in today's time, race classification is important to level the playing fields and to address those injustices of the past. I agree that we need to draw a line in the sand. We're 20 years on into the democracy, and we know, but I don't think South Africa is ready to do away with that at this stage, unless there's a change in government and the political parties drive it on the national, in terms of national legislation, and do the necessary amendments. But for so long as we have those provisions in the Constitution and those constitutional court cases that confirms that the race advancing disadvantaged individuals on the basis of race is compliant with the Constitution, it will continue to be implemented today. So it's not to say that in the past race classification was evil. Why are we perpetuating it now? The reality is that we're looking at this in an attempt to address those imbalances. Whether it's the right mechanism or not, or whether it's working in terms of preferential procurement and BE, maybe that's another question to be asked, but we can't equate the two. That's all I have to say on that. Thanks.
Okay. So colleagues, quite a lot of discussion points. I'm actually quite glad we have a lot of issues that we've raised here. Yes, Advocate Nchaluba.
Thank you, Henry. Apologies, I joined late. Two things, Henry. I think Sanne spoke about conflict of laws. The interpretation of statutes provide what must happen when there are conflict of laws. Secondly, I'm saying this because I will always happen one thing, Henry. There's a unit that deals with constitutionality of regulations that must be consulted, because before the regulations are made final, they must append that they meet the constitutionality. It's true there are limitation clauses, but you need to justify that. And hence it becomes important that there must be a way of engagement now with the office of the state attorney, specifically the people that must deal with the constitutionality, because I'm afraid those are the people who must actually guide government at this point, so that we don't land with other unnecessary cases that could have been avoided. That is just my advice at this point. And that is something that we could request from the office of the state attorney, because that is their jurisdiction, together, of course, with the Minister of Finance. I'm talking about the processes now of approval of regulations, because they need to justify the constitutionality of each of those clauses before they are passed on in Parliament. And I think that's the most important step that will assist in dealing with the issues that we are raising. The Constitution, yes, it provides for fair discrimination, But there are stringent requirements in terms of constitutional law that you must put in place to argue that that discrimination is fair. And definitely within the procurement space, there's a lot that we need to do in terms of redress. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate. Right. Okay, so a lot to ponder around, lots to go back to, maybe to Treasury and specifically also ask about those points that Ron picked up, I guess. If there's nothing else, then I'm gonna ask Senelius just raised his hand there.
Just a quick one. National Treasury is also in and around the country doing the rollouts. So that's like the clarification I think Ron is actually referring to. I think they are in the book. They will be with us here in KZN. We have agreed on the 28th, hence I'm here in the Olive Convention Center trying to prepare for the day. So I'm just saying that so that the colleagues who are here in KZN, I will also issue a formal communication that they will come and join. And I would appreciate these questions, this debate, because they will actually shape the way forward on how we craft these policies. So just keep your ears and eyes open on your provinces. They will be around, they will be providing some clarity. And I'm hoping then after that, those sessions will be able to move. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, yeah. I know they're also meeting with some of the other, some other entities. I think it might be on Friday. But yeah, so that just kind of emphasize or re-emphasize your point. And most probably will be meeting with some stakeholders, key stakeholders. Ron?
Henry, rather than closing the session, which we will do quickly, I want to suggest we have an additional session at another stage, maybe next week. And I would like to suggest if we do, we put 2 items or include 2 items on the agenda. The one is we agree on where we are confused. I've mentioned 5 points. There's a 6th point I forgot. And that is, the stuff that's now out of the 2017, are those valid things we can, as organs of state, can put into our own policies? For example, pre-qualification, in light of the quote you gave from the Supreme Court that they hated. What is National Treasury's view? Do we have that discretion as an organ of state to put it in? So one is to agree on a list of questions. Number 2 is that we share with each other any clarifications we've received. Saneli has made that offer. We are doing our own things. I'm sure everybody is trying to get a hold of context to try and find out what's what here. But we just share with each other where we're growing in our understanding, and that'll inform the policies. Bear in mind, there's a very limited time to put this policy in place because you've got the silly season coming up, and there are boards to consider to approve these things. So the timing is not ideal. Thanks, Henry.
Okay, certainly something we can entertain next week. Ron, I'll also speak to Sean about that. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so I think we can then pick up, extend this next week and look broader than just the income generating thing as we just raised now. I think the reason why we initially just kind of focus on income generating was because we didn't get any other suggestions back, and that was the one suggestion we got. But there are certainly lots of other things we also need to pick up on. So
there's another hand up, Henry.
To go with that. Yes, I can see Ron. Thanks. Advocate Mtsuluma.
Thank you, Henry. Just picking up on what Sanele was saying, is it possible that the session with Treasury be, if you can encourage it to be virtual, so that then we are able to have access to the link and participate? because I'm actually worried about the consultation should be such that at some point there's sufficient broad consensus on issues. And whilst one appreciates that they are moving from one place to another, at what point are all these points consolidated into saying, then this is the final position for concurrence as now, as a state, not as individuals or as provincial departments, for uniformity. Thank you.
So again, colleagues, thank you for your time. Thank you for all the important issues raised. There are lots, there's still lots that we need to think through. And so thank you for that. But if there's nothing else, then I can call that we then call this particular workshop or meeting closed.